And the Welsh were originally known, of course, as the Brythoniaid, the original British being the term for the Celts. And later, after the invasion of the Germanic tribes, Cymru derived from the word combrogos, which means comrades or fellow countrymen. The word Wales then derived from the Germanic name for foreigners or outsiders, and that presents us, I think, with a linguistic root of that age-old tension between the Cymru Cymraeg, the speakers of the Welsh language, and the Welsh, that is, the non-Welsh speakers of Wales. And as the statistics testify, the majority of people in Wales do not speak the language, and yet the language itself is so much of a presence in Wales and perceived as an integral part of the Welsh identity for many. It's a growing, evolving language, of course, despite its constant oppression and colonising by outside influences, and in particular by kind of Anglo-American culture. For many, then, the survival of Welsh and its ability to hold its head up high today as this modern European language is quite miraculous, really, that kind of continuous sort of battling, but also that preservation and changing. It's a fantastic manifestation again of our identity, how it's changing and becoming stronger. The language itself has gone through many transformations over the centuries. It was originally an Indo-European language, which then evolved into the Celtic language. And from the Brythonic branch of the Celtic then evolved Welsh, Cornish and Breton, while Scottish and Irish Gaelic and the Manx language are derivative from the Goidelic or Hugh Celtic languages. So that's perhaps a common misconception from outsiders as well as insiders that all Celtic tongues are mutually intelligible. While it is true that it's often seen to be a mutual solidarity between the Celtic nations, and especially so when any of the Celtic teams play against England. That's where we really come together. Their languages can also seem, alien to us, and as any other foreign tongue, despite there being common words between them, especially in the case of Welsh, Cornish and Breton. They're talking to a friend of mine who speaks Gaelic. We are separated by that linguistic barrier because they don't have the same roots, so we don't really have that many words in common. So the Welsh language remained the language of the majority of people to the Act of Union in 1536, which of course had a direct impact on the growth of the language. But that was a brutal form of assimilation on behalf of the English government, who laid down the law that English should be the only language of the courts in Wales, and that the use of Welsh would prohibit contribution to the administration of the country. This, of course, was kind of the worst kind of colonisation, and a very deliberate attempt to eradicate, these differences between Wales and England, thus easing the notion of them being one homogeneous nation. The English language, therefore, was commonly counted incessantly so as a language of advancement and promise, and the Welsh language I would see as the language of debasement and backwardness. And although the Welsh language has come a long way since then, traces of this attitude certainly can still be seen today. And while such an act would have been the nail in the coffin, I think, for many language and culture, Welsh, while being the unofficial language, found great strength and courage in becoming a subversive language, albeit within an acceptable mould. The translation and publication of the Bible in Welsh in 1588 by Bishop William Morgan enabled Welsh to become a powerful language of worship. And the highly literary quality of the translation enabled a very, very good version of spoken Welsh and to flourish, preserving the language in the communities and avoiding the pitfall of Welsh turning into a casual, disrespected dialect used only by the lower orders. Although these translations were part of the English government's plan to further colonise the Welsh, they succeeded in providing the Welsh with the one linguistic tool that would actually enable their cultural freedom and longevity, but kind of backfired on them, didn't it? And yet, even though the Welsh language overcame this hurdle, colonisation continued. The Industrial Revolution also took its toll, for although it succeeded in developing the language within an urban community, as opposed to the traditional rural society, it also saw more and more people migrating into Wales, and English becoming the common language of many society. In 1864, an incident known as the treason of the Blue Books, I'm sure a lot of people know about this. This was carried out as a kind of public inspection by Englishmen on the state of non-conformist schools in Wales, which again laid the blame on the Welsh tongue for what they perceived to be the morally unacceptable state of education in society. So in the wake of the Blue Books then, English was viewed once again as the only adequate language of education in society, and in came this Welsh Not. This was a supposedly destructive form of punishment used in schools, whereby a wooden board was hung around the neck of any child found speaking Welsh and honoured the words Welsh nods, something similar to this in shape. But similar colonising techniques were also used in Brittany and as far afield as Kenya, where the minority language of Gikuyu was prohibited in schools, and children caught speaking it would have to wear their shame in the form of a metal placard which read, "I'm stupid" or "I'm donkey." So it's interesting to know that in other communities, where they're colonised by the British, I suppose, and imperialism, then it has a similar kind of techniques and colonising devices. And the Kikuyu writer Ngugi wa Thiong'o read about Wales, and you can see a lot of similarities between Cymru and Wales and the way that they were trying to get rid of the language. And yet, despite all efforts, again, Welsh did succeed in flourishing. Education became available in Welsh, with Welsh medium schools being established from the 1940s onwards, and Welsh language schools now exist in most areas in Wales, whilst also fast becoming the medium of instruction in many university courses and further education colleges. There's also been a turnaround in attitudes in many of the post-industrial communities in South Wales, whereas the previous generation would have urged their children to focus on English in order to kind of get on in the world. There is now a really happening sense that many of these non-Welsh speaking parents want to see their children receiving their education solely through the medium of Welsh, and for the same reason, in order to get on in the world, to get a better chance of thriving within the current bilingual climate. And even if there's some reason for doing it, it's a fantastic opportunity then for the Welsh language to move on, and for bilingualism to really mean that it's working, on both sides, that there isn't a gap there, that those who speak English also speak Welsh, and vice versa. So although Wales has throughout the centuries never succeeded, gaining or regaining its presence as this majority language, it's nevertheless succeeded in winning, a colossal victory, leading us to the bilingual Wales of the present day. In that sense, I think you can say that language really is iconic. Though bilingualism is perceived by many as a compromise, as I said, bilingualism ultimately works one way in favour of the majority, but increasingly so it's becoming more of a two-way street. And it's also possible to see increasing bilingualism of countries putting Wales in a relatively strong position, thanks to the incessant and shaken radical campaigning and activism of the Welsh Language Society in the 60s and 70s, which continues into the present day. The language is now an official language, and there's a substantial increase in those learning the language. I grew up in the 80s and having parents who were part of the Welsh Language Society, and a lot of my friends at that time also had parents who were in the Welsh Language Society, and would end up getting arrested for various sort of political activist sort of events, like painting slogans and sort of taking over certain buildings. And I do remember this one story when I was 14, getting ready for a school concert, and my mother had been out all day with the Welsh Language Society, a campaign of painting slogans on English-only sort of telephone boxes. And I remember looking out the window when she was supposed to come back and seeing a police car. Most people see the police car, they just get frightened. And I just thought, oh, she's been arrested again, And at first thought, it went through my mind, she's not going to be able to go to the concert now. She promised that she would come to the concert. And but I think, I can actually safely say that it was much better for her to have been arrested, because by now, British Telecom actually have a completely bilingual service in Wales. And it's obviously because of those, what I saw at the time was these little small events that were taking place, and those things were all very, very important, just like the campaign of taking down English-only road signs. We have bilingual road signs now. So all these campaigns, all these different rallies that I grew up, going to with my parents, which was just, for me, very, very normal. But for them, it was, a time in particular fervour and wanting to stand out and stand up and say, we won't take this. So the small triumphs often are things that, actually have a really positive impact in years and years to come.